cucumber, pinolas, bananas, spiced lentils, hard-boiled eggs, Bombay ducks, and coconut. These are just some of the condiments for curry dinner today on the French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. We're going to do a curry dinner today that's been all the way to India and come back again. It's called curry d'agneau retour des Indes, and it has stops all along the way, because I don't pretend to be an Indian Hindu cook at all. So I don't make no pretensions of having this a traditional curry. It has Indian influences and French influences and English influences, but the main thing is to show you what fun you can have with the idea of curry. And our word curry comes from curry, K-A-R-E, which means in Tamil, which is one of the Indian languages, a flavor or a sauce. And we know curry usually as curry powder, but there isn't any spice that's called curry. It's a blend of a whole lot of things, about a dozen of them. And in India, if you're making curry, you make your own mix, sort of a house blend. And it always contains turmeric and coriander and cardamom. And here's some of the seeds of cardamom. And these are only 3 of about the 12 things that go into curry. And I'm not going to grind my own this time. I'm going to use an imported ready mix, which comes from Madras. And Madras is Tamil country. And I'm going to read you what it has on the label. It has coriander, turmeric, chili, salt, cumin, fennel, pepper, cloves, anise, fenugreek, cinnamon, mustard, cashew buds, chili powder, garlic, ground nuts, and dried ginger. And it's all free from coloring or adulteration. Thank heaven. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. And that is this tremendous mixture. And whatever recipe you are going to use that has curry powder in it, it's always called a curry, like a lamb curry or chicken curry or a shrimp curry. And what we're going to do is a lamb curry, just because I happen to have some leftover lamb. And the first thing you have to do is to make your curry sauce, which starts out even in India or Greece or Boston or any place else, with some onions. And in this case, I'm going to have about 2 cups of sliced onions cooked in about 3 tablespoons of oil and stirred with an orange spoon, which is very important. And in India, you would use ghee, spelt G-H-E-E, which is clarified butter. I imagine that's butter clarified from water buffalo milk. I don't know. But that's rather expensive even in India, so that you would use any kind of an oil like cottonseed oil or mustard oil, and I'm using olive oil. And I'm going to cover this pan and let the onions cook quietly over here. And while they cook, I'm going to start some rice, because you could hardly have a curry without rice. And we have 1½ cups of plain, ordinary, long grain rice in a pan. And that was 1½ cups of rice and 3 cups of water. You always want to have twice as much water. And this is a very easy system for doing rice, which I think you will enjoy, because it's so simple, and I like being able to use just plain ordinary rice rather than one of those treated ones. And that has 2 tablespoons of butter in it and 2 teaspoons of salt. And I'm going to have a little tiny bit of of saffron in it because that'll make a pretty color. And this gets stirred up once and then covered, and it's going to cook for just about 15 minutes, and that's all you have to do for it. And if that isn't about the easiest way of doing rice, I don't know what is. And now that we've got the onions cooking, we've got to get to what we're going to curry, which is lamb. And I'm going to show you. I happen to have lamb because we had a leftover leg of lamb, a gigot d'agneau, but you can use pork, veal, turkey, duck, roast beef, and I think what is good about this is that it's cooked rare, so that all it needs to do is to be warmed through, and this is a wonderful way of using leftovers. And you got a bone, and this is one of your kitchen treasures. Doesn't look like a treasure, but it actually is. And one reason the European cooking is so good because they never waste anything, and we're always throwing bones to the dogs, and we should put them in the stock pot, brown it with some onions and carrots, and simmer it for 2 or 3 hours, and you have a wonderful stock, and that's what's going to make your curry very good indeed. And now we're going to brown the lamb in a little bit of oil. I'm just going to film the pan with the oil, and then in goes the lamb, and be sure that whatever meat you use is dry. And this, because you have your, it's not a problem here, but your meat is fully cooked. This is a roast, and it's tender meat to begin with, so in this case you want only just to brown it with a little salt and pepper, and all it's going to be done is going to happen to it is it's going to heat through in a curry sauce. It's a nice fresh pepper. And the initial browning gives it a little more flavor. But the important thing is when you have meat like, say, a very good roast of beef or chicken or something like that, and you're going to re-cook it and use it in leftovers, either you have to cook it just to warm it through again, or you have to cook it for about an hour. That's just the way it works. And this is just cooked to warm through, so that's browned enough, and I'm going to set it aside and then finish the sauce. And these are the onions, and you let your onions cook for about 10 minutes until they're nice and tender. And then you put your curry in. Now this is a very important part of curry cookery, which is that you always have to cook the curry powder, even if it's homemade, for 2 or 3 minutes before you add anything else, because that takes away the raw taste of it. And I think how much curry to use depends on your own taste of it. This happens to be not too strong a curry powder, but some of them are terribly peppery. In this case, I've put in about 2 or 3 tablespoons, and that should cook around for 2 or 3 minutes. But if you hadn't done much curry before, don't put in too much, because you can always add a little bit more later, even if you haven't, though you're supposed to, even if you haven't cooked it, because you might find that it's terribly peppery. And in Ceylon, where we were, they always said the curry wasn't any good unless it was so hot it made the sweat stand out on the top of your head. That's too strong for me. And now this is to have about 3 tablespoons of flour. This is, as usual with leftovers, proportions are rather loose. And I want to have about 3 cups of sauce, so I've put in about 3 tablespoons of flour, and that has to turn around and cook a little bit. And then I've got some excellent stock that was made with lamb bones, and I had some leftover roast beef bones, and I've cooked it up, and I'm going to put in just about 3 cups of it. And this is, I think this is the capital part of of your cooking. This is why, as I said before, European cooking is awfully good, because they use they use the stock and flavor up things the way they really should taste. And I think the good thing about making your own stock is that it tastes like you. If you feel that you have a good taste, that's the way to do it, because it doesn't taste like canned bouillon all the time. And now we're going to put in about half a cup of wine. I'm using some red wine just because I happen to have some. And then we want to have some garlic. It was interesting to me that the Indians use a lot of garlic and a lot of onions, and I think that's one reason, if you're going to be a vegetarian, Indian cooking is pretty nice. And there's peeled garlic cloves, and I'm going to go wham, and then chop it up. I love the garlic pressed, but I don't use it every minute. This has a more Indian feel to me of mincing it. And now you want this to simmer up. I hope I've got gotten enough thickening in it, which I think I have. I may put a little tiny bit more in, because I don't want to. This is just in case you feel you may have slipped up. This is a little wine and flour paste. So I'm not sure that's going to be thick enough. I'm just going to set that aside in case I need a little thickening at the end. That's a little bit of insurance. Then I'm going to put in some raisins. I like the idea of the sweet and sour, and these are just plain ordinary black seedless raisins, and then one little small sour apple. The raisins are the sweet and the apple is the sour. I don't know. I think this is more Indonesian, like a rice taffel of putting apples and raisins in, than it is Hindu Indian, but I'm not sure. Anyway, it's very good, because I think the curry powder needs a little sweetening up. And then we'll have to have some herbs. I want some thyme and some bay. That's about half a teaspoon of thyme, and I'm going to put in one bay leaf. And I always use imported bay leaves. I believe these come from Persia. Now that does seem to be thickening nicely, so I'm probably not going to need my emergency flour paste. Now you want to taste it at this point. If it needs more salt, put it in. It needs more salt, very definitely. I have to use another spoon now. I have to be hygienic. If I put the spoon in, I can't eat from it. At least that's what I've been told. And one has to practice being careful in private, so that one will also always be careful in public. See how that is now. I think that's going to be very good. Now another capital and a very important part of a curry is coconut. Curry's a little tiny bit strong. And I want you to see how to prepare fresh coconut. Now, what have I got here? Yes. We have, excuse me, I think that curry is a little peppier than I thought. Now, if you're going to buy coconut, which are in season all year, but not so much in summer as in winter, you want to be sure that they're heavy and that they slosh. Can you hear that sloshing? That's the coconut water inside, and you've got to have that if it's going to be a good coconut. And then you've got to get the water out, and so these three little things are its eyes. And you're going to punch out the eyes with an ice pick. Punched right in there. That practically cracked the nut, but that's quite all right. And there, the third eye. And then you drain that in a cup. And here's some of the water in there. I want you to see what it looks like. And this is coconut water, this stuff. It's not coconut milk. I always thought it was coconut milk, but this is just the water, and the water has a very mild taste. It's good for babies and invalids. And now, what you've got to do with your drained coconut is to be able to open it up. And, because you want to get the meat out, and there are coconut purists who say that you should do nothing but hammer the coconut open and then dig out the meat, and it takes a long time. But a much easier way is to use the oven. Put it in a 400-degree oven and leave it for 20 minutes until the shell cracks, just like that. And then put it in a towel, and you'll see why. Wrap it all up, and then take a big whacker of any type and go, rum! And there you are. The shell is opened up, and the reason that you wanted the heat is because that the meat gets separated very easily from the shell. And if you don't heat it, you have a terrible time. The meat is all attached to the shell like that, and you have to take a knife and you go, and you usually cut yourself. But in this way, you're perfectly safe. And some people leave this brown skin on, but I've tasted the brown skin and it doesn't have any taste at all. And I think it's much better to take it off. And the easiest way to take it off is to take a vegetable peeler and just peel it off. Particularly when you're going to use grated coconut for cakes, you certainly wouldn't want to leave any brown skin on. And this, you see, this is really very easy to do. And I think it takes the tears out of coconut. Now, if you're going to for a curry, you want to have some freshly grated coconut. That's part of the condiment, which looks like that. And you can grate it by hand in a grater, and that takes a long time. The best way is to grate it in a blender, which I'm now going to do. You take your meat and cut it up into little pieces like that, and put it in the blender. And it grates up very nicely, just like that. And now we're going to make the milk. And this is what the milk looks like. And this is a mixture of the coconut meat and water that's allowed to settle. And I'm going to use boiling water. And this is a boiling water gadget on my sink, which is very useful. And put about a cup in there. And in no time at all, you've got the whole thing grated up with the water. And if you don't have a blender, you just grate it up, bring it up to the boil in a saucepan, and then let it stand. But in this case, the easy way to get, you've got to strain it. So you pour this right into a big old-fashioned potato masher and go, and a lot of recipes you see that they say to squeeze it by handfuls in a cheesecloth. But there you are. That's just a plain residue that is really not much good for anything. You can make a second pressing by putting all of this into a saucepan and moistening it with water, bringing it up just to the boil, and then squeezing it out again, and you'll get a rather pale milk out of it. You see, that's just milk. Oh. And what's interesting about this milk is that if you pour it into a glass jar and then put it in the ice box, it separates, and you got your pure coconut cream or coconut butter, which is, there you are. And this is absolutely lovely, and that's perfect. That's really primitive cocoa butter, and you can use that in cake frostings. But I'm going to use this milk just as it is and put it into our curry sauce. I think that's great. That's fun. I hadn't realized how that was all done. Now there's our curry sauce. I'm just going to put a little bit of this in. And then if you need to thin the sauce out later, you can put in some more. And now I'm going to put the lamb in the sauce. And now the trick here in this lamb, because you do not want it to overcook, is just to let it come up, just to come up to the simmer, so that it's just heated through in the sauce, and then set it aside. And if you can let it do it ahead, say for about half an hour or so, you want the meat to steep in the sauce, and then the meat will have absorbed its flavor. So you could even say do this the day ahead. I'm going to take a look and see how our rice is doing. There she is. And that has the little clam holes, and that is, I'm going to stir that up with, see, I think, you know, that's just fine. And so this, you can take off the heat and leave cover, and it'll finish its cooking. And now we have the condiments that go with the curry, and you can have your usual things like chopped nuts and coconut and other things, and then you can be very exotic, and you can have poppadoms. And these are these brown wafers. They're made, you won't believe it, they're made out of lentil flour, and you fry them in deep fat. And this is very hot, and then you take a spatula, which the British call one of these things a slice. I love it, that's very British, isn't it? And then turn it over. As you see, that only takes about, just about 2 or 3 seconds. And dip it out and drain it on paper towels. I'm going to do you one more. And these you can buy at any of the import stores. And there are a lot of Indian ones around, and these all come from Madras again, that great Tamil country. And I think it's best to do these one at a time because they go so quickly. And this is just ordinary vegetable oil that I'm using. And then turn them over. And then another exotic is Bombay duck. And they come in a package or a pan, a package or a little can like this. And what they are little tiny, very thin fish that are about 8 inches long, and they skim over the water in the Bay of Bombay. And I think because they skim over the surface, some wag said that they were Bombay ducks. But they aren't. They're little tiny fishes that have been filleted. And these also get put into deep fat. And they have a rather somewhat disagreeable smell while they're frying, but then as soon as they're fried, they take and taste and look just like bacon. And these again just take 2 or 3 minutes. But this is one of the most typical and desirable of the really authentic Indian condiments. If you don't happen to be able to run into Bombay duck, just use bacon. But you need something that has a little crispness to it, like these. There, and then, as with both of them, flip them over, and as you see, they both brown a little bit more after you have taken them out. And other condiments you will see when we're in the dining room. And we're now, the curry's all done, and that you just would reheat again, and the rice is all done. So we are ready to serve the curry. Take this over. Now I'm going to put the rice onto the platter. That's a really so wonderfully easy and effective way of cooking rice. And the rice you can do way ahead of time and just reheat over simmering water. Then on goes the curry. And there's that bay leaf, which I'll have to take out. And I have a little more rice to go on the sides here. And I'm going to put a little bit of parsley on. I don't know whether in India, I guess they must use parsley in India. They probably have something that has a more exotic flavor. Well, I might put a tiny bit more rice there on. Of course, you could serve the curry separately and not on the same platter. Now, ready to serve. Now I want you to see the other condiments we have. There. Now, the rice onto a plate. This wonderful smelling curry on also. And then the accompaniments or condiments or whatever you'd like to call them. And here's a papadum, and there's a little bit of fresh coconut. And usually these things are all piled on top of each other. And a bit of chutney, because that again you have your wonderful sweet and sour. And now this is a cucumber and green pepper with a little bit of salt, pepper, and onion. And here are a few little sauteed pine nuts. And diced bananas, which are lovely. And with this, you can serve beer or lemonade. And here are some spiced lentils. And there's a little egg. And also here is a Bombay duck, which I'm just going to crumble all over everything. And that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
The French Chef has been made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation. Julia Child is co-author of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volumes 1 and 2.